Hello. So I'm going to talk to you today about user testing on any budget, and I mean any budget. And if I have not shown you a thing that will work on your budget, then come on over afterwards, because then I owe you a drink or something. So I'm Ida. I'm also Ida on Twitter, or Ida, as we would say in Norway. I'm going to mention a bunch of tools, resources, links, and they're all on this URL. So if you want to take a photo of that, you can do that now, if you need that URL. And I used to work at an agency for 7 or 8 years. When it was founded originally in year 2000, their whole business idea was about user testing. They only did user testing, and then they organically grew into more of a broader consultancy after that with design and content and front-end and that kind of stuff. So I took user testing for granted there, like a thing that you would always do, and we always had the resources for it. But I'm not in a very big company anymore. This is my startup, and when I say this is actually the whole startup. We all fit into a selfie, and yes, we have no office. So we don't live literally on the fjord, but it's close to it. And the thing that so when we're a tiny startup like this, suddenly resources were so much more present in the work that I had to do. So I still really believed in user testing, but I had to figure out how to do it on smaller budgets. So just to give you a little bit of context, so what we're trying to do, well, it's video calling, and then everyone's like, yeah, that's what the world needs, another video calling tool. Great that somebody's finally started to work on that. The idea is that it should be easy, and it should be for everyone, and it should be specifically for professionals and businesses, like maybe a physician or a therapist or sales. And if I'm going to go and pitch it, I'm like, yeah, it's so easy. You can just you just have a link, you send it, you open it on any device, sorry, and wow, you're in the video call. And that's still what we're aspiring to, but I think still what people think about video calling, it's not really that easy, even though it's like 2018. Actually, the experience of having a messed up video call is so mainstream that it's a joke in a Pixar movie. So let's see what feels more familiar to do, this illustration, or maybe something like this.
Go.
You stole the Medusa serum?
Well, stole the serum, saved the day, did your job for you. Call it what you will. Debbie.
Dave.
Dave.
He hacked into our system.
Where's the sound?
Dave,
I can't.
your microphone, it's not
Click
on.
on the button with the picture of the microphone.
Every time a villain calls in, this happens.
Hello? Hello?
Well, now we can
So
hear you,
annoying.
but we cannot see you.
Every time.
That's like talking to my parents.
This always
How
happens.
about now?
Yes! Oh, yes, we've got you. That's
Excellent.
fantastic.
Now, where was I?
Yeah. So that basically the beginning of every video call in 2018 is still troubleshooting, which is kind of weird. But anyway, at the point we are at the web today, and the competitiveness between businesses, everyone wants to be intuitive. We're building in this intuitive product, and no one will ever, I don't think anyone will say that it's a nice to have anymore. That's just like a thing that it has to be. But intuitive kind of means that things are self-explanatory. That even if you weren't there, someone that taking part in building it, it was still so easy to understand and use. But how do you really know if something is self-explanatory, if you're the one saying that it's self-explanatory? Really, users are the only ones that can tell you it's intuitive. And for me, user testing is also, because of this, the only way to really figure out that things are intuitive. There's no way of knowing. And so many times, if you've built something, going out and trying to user test it feels very much like this. And then you're like, what? The thing is, when it feels like this, it's not that your users are very dumb. It's just that maybe you didn't make a glass after all. It looked like a very simple thing to you, but when you bring it out to actual users, it feels a lot more complicated. So let's take an example. The hamburger icon. It was mentioned earlier. Raise your hand if you've ever been in an argument about the hamburger icon. Oh, yeah, great. here are the numbers. So back in 2014, the Norwegian Post and their design team were arguing about whether people understood the hamburger icon. So just to close the discussion, they did a survey with 4,273 Norwegians, representative, of the Norwegian population. And the question was simple: do you recognize this icon? And even with this little illustration here, I'm sorry that this has been so, it was not this pixelated at the time. So even with this illustration showing this is the hamburger icon and like pointing it out, so you had context and everything, do you know what it was? And they could tell if people were answering the survey on mobile or desktop. So how many do you think knew what it meant on mobile? How many percent? Suggestions? 60? 90? 20? 53% said they didn't know what it was, so roughly half. But if we go to desktop, 73% said, no, I don't know what that means. And the best part was for the people that said yes, so we asked, can you please explain us what it means? And they were basically wrong. So even the people that thought they knew what it meant were wrong. And I, myself, am guilty of this. I'm going to show you something that I made that did not work at all. So that's me, but just pretend that I'm a user. So first of all, this screen is confusing enough at all. This is what you have to do before you go into a video call, which is confusing enough. But the interesting thing is what totally didn't work at all is what happened in the next step. So we're going to click, I'm ready, notify Dag Inge, which is my colleague here. Let's see what happens. So Dag Inge will receive you as soon as possible. And then there's a green blinking accept call button and a ringtone. People didn't do anything. They're like, yeah? Okay, I just had to click it so you don't have to listen to it anymore. So I would never, I don't have the imagination to imagine that a green blinking accept call button with the ringtone is something that the user will not understand. Would you imagine this? And you may be like, are you guys saying, well, of course, this is because, do you have a theory why it doesn't work? Sorry? Yeah, so good, yeah, exactly. You got a good instinct for this. So the thing is, I never would have guessed this, but from the user testing, where we realized that people had such a clear idea that they were the ones contacting the other person. So when they heard the ringtone, they're like, yeah, it's ringing. Why isn't he picking up? I'm waiting. I'm ready. That's the thing that you would never be able to pick up on from if you present the product and then ask people in the focus group, or you look at Google Analytics. It's just not possible to pick it up if you're not there sitting with the person doing it together with them. So the thing is, we all have these blind spots. So when I talk about user testing, colleagues are not your users. Even designers that don't work at your company, they're not your users. Developers are definitely not your users. And already, I used an anecdote, and I used a GIF, but maybe you're still not convinced. So then we have numbers, a table. I know this is a bunch of numbers, so don't be stressed out if you're like, don't try to read it, actually. I'm going to break it down to you. So these are 5 different studies where what they did is first, they had experts review a page and identify usability issues. Then they user tested the same interface, and then they compared what they found. So what experts find versus what you find in user testing. And on average, 1 in 3 problems found by the so-called experts were false alarms. So your usability expert is like, no, you can't have a button like that. That's never going to work. And then the user tested it, and it actually worked. So maybe you're changing things that you don't actually have to change because you listen to an expert, like me, that thought that a blinking green button would be good enough. But even worse, on average, 1 in 2 problems that users actually had were overlooked by the experts. That's such a huge risk that you're taking every time you're skipping user testing. And since tomorrow we have as the CSS day. So I will imagine that most of you are developers, and think about, well, why do we do pull requests or code review? It's not that you think that every single time there's going to be a bug or a problem, but over time it reduces risk. So it's just a smart thing to do over time to diminish the risk that you're taking, that you're shipping a subpar product. User testing is also an essential part of reviewing, because you're going to be blind about it. You're not going to get a report about it afterwards if you don't do user testing. It's so important. But the good thing, so you're not doing it is a huge risk. The good news is that it's not actually that hard to do, and it's not that expensive. Have you heard before this phrase that you only need to test with 5 people? Raise your hand if you've heard that before. Okay, some people. Keep your hand up if you know why 5 is enough. Yeah, because that's the thing. Why is it 5? Okay, so do you play Yahtzee in the Netherlands? Do you know with the dice? Yeah. Okay, so imagine a dice, and I say, like, if you can throw a 5 or a 6, I'm going to give you 10 euros. So how many, so 5 or 6, like any of those, and I'm going to give you 10 euros. How many dice rolls do you feel like you need to have to be pretty sure I'm going to win those 10 euros? Like, what does your gut tell you? 3? Yeah? Any other suggestions? 5? Yeah. So that's actually what we're doing when we say you only need to test with 5 people. We're not doing a survey. We're not going to figure out, the percentage of the Dutch population who's going to vote for this or that party. We're just going to have a high chance of catching something. It's probability. So again, with the 5 and the 6, it's about a third. Or that's a third probability of getting one of those. So let's imagine that in my customer base, you're my customer base, and a third of you had the accept call button. So if I just take a random 5 people out of this group, I have more than an 80% chance of getting at least one person in my testing group that has this call button issue. Are you with me? And the reason we talk about 5 as a magic number is that, let's say, we want to have more people. We want to be more sure that we can actually catch it. Let's go up to 8. So we increased our resources, spending almost like 50% more resources, but we didn't really get that much more confidence in the results. And someone here mentioned number 3. Already with 3 people, you're going to have like roughly a 70% chance of observing that problem. And even if you don't like math, how big are our chances to find the problem if you test with 0 people? You know, that's right, it's 0. So this is also the reason that doing frequent tests, small and frequent tests, is a lot better than doing bigger and infrequent tests. So if you test with 3, and then you try to improve it, and then you test with 3, and then you try to improve it, and you test with 3, and then you try to improve it, that is going to be your best strategy for reducing usability problems over time. But testing with 3, 4, or 5 people, that's not that much work, actually. And so a little side note there. So when I say 5, then we're thinking that there's a rather, as we would say, homogeneous group. And doesn't mean that you need to have all kinds of people, but just to give an example, so our tool is, for instance, used by physicians, but also by their patients. Physicians and patients have very different background knowledge, different experiences, different needs. So then I would more think that, well, I should have 5 physicians and 5 patients. Or maybe 3 physicians and 3 patients. Then there's 6 people, and you can still fit them in one day. So when I talk about user testing, ideally, these are real users solving real tasks, or at least realistic users solving realistic tasks. And I'm going to get to how you can do it on a budget, but the thing is, for it to actually be useful, there are some things that we have to have in place. For instance, the tasks. What is that really? Like, it's such an important part of actually getting useful data out of user testing. So let's say I have a question, Is it clear to physicians that they can use Confer for video appointments? Because in a bunch of countries, there are a lot of like, legal requirements for what physicians can do with like patient data and that kind of stuff. Is that easier for them? So a very typical, like, I'm just going to call it a beginner mistake, because we do mistakes when we're beginners, when you do user testing, is that you have a thing that you want to figure out, and then you just go and ask that question. So for instance, if I ask you, is it clear to you that you need to click the blinking accept call button? People will be like, yeah, that's totally clear, because I basically gave the answer away. So what we want to know is not the task that we should give the people. So first, write down the things that you're curious about, and then try to think about how you're going to phrase it as a question. So we could do this in more ways. This could be very open and explorative. Maybe you're not even at my website. What would you do to find a video calling service that's suitable for physicians? Or we could be a lot more specific. For instance, in the US, the regulation is called HIPAA. Could you find a page which explains how Confer is HIPAA compliant? Then I'm basically giving away that there is a page about that, but it's going to be a lot more easier for me to measure it. Or you could go somewhere in between, like going to the website and like, what would you do to figure out whether it was suitable? And there are pros and cons of this. If it's open and more explorative, you can identify a broader range of problems. But it's going to be harder to compare between the different people. But it's okay to give different tasks to different people, because it makes it a lot more realistic, but it's also more time-consuming, because you're kind of like wandering all over the web and just trying to understand. It's always more like user research more than user testing. If you want to be get more specific, it's easier to measure and compare, but it can be leading. But it's really useful when you know there's a problem and you want to figure out why. So for instance, the Norwegian Post used this because the three things that people would go to do at the Norwegian Post website was track a package, find out how much they need to pay to ship a package, and also opening times. And then if you know you have problems with the tracking package, just have 20 people in, ask them to, okay, track this package, here you go, and then just look at what the different people did. Because we already know that that's what everyone's doing, so it's not that big a deal that it's leading. Then there's a fancy word called moderating. It's a fancy word because it's a fancy word for just talking to people, but it's a fancy word because it's a kind of exhausting way to talk with people. Because you have, as the person sitting next to the person that's going to do the user testing, you kind of have three roles. You're the flight attendant. This is completely normal. You don't need to stress out at all. Would you like a coffee? Because that's just what we do high up in the air. So I'm not going to start a rant about flight attendants, but they're there to help you relax. Kind of like a radio reporter, like when you're listening to a sports event. So it's easier for you to follow along what's happening. And also kind of like a researcher. Follow the test plan. Make sure that this is all okay. And one of the essential things that, as a moderator that you need to do is you need to help the person think out loud. This is essential for it to be useful, because if they're not thinking out loud, you might as well just put a Hotjar on your... Any of you had Hotjar recordings on your website? Raise your hand. Did you also have that feeling first when you saw the feature, wow, this is amazing? That was the first thing when you saw the feature, and afterwards you tried to look at one of the videos and I don't understand what's going on. What's this person up to? They're this is so weird. I can't have no imagination. Why are they doing this thing? Can you recognize this feeling? It's so cool when you first see it, and then you realize, well, it's impossible to understand when you don't know what the person's intent is, or what they're feeling, or what they're thinking about. You just see a mouse, and it's that's so weird. Someone is just here to troll me at Hotjar. So try to have the person think aloud. I think tell people you can just talk as much as possible. You can't really talk too much, and just kind of just walk me through what you're doing. Well, now I'm looking for this thing, and I'm doing that thing. So. Sometimes they forget to think out loud, so then you kind of just have to remind them, but do that in an open way, what are you thinking about? And then they will, well, I'm looking for the menu. In And then you don't go, well, the menu's right there. You shut up. You just listen. So you want to help them to remember to think out loud and ask open questions. Sometimes, though, they might ask you a question like, what happens if I click here? You should not tell them. 2 reasons. So the first most obvious one is that if you tell them, you won't really know whether they would have figured it out by themselves. So it's not that useful anymore. But the second thing is, the second you tell them, you're changing the dynamic. Then that makes you the smart person that knows what's really going on, and they're kind of the dumb person. And then people feel more dumb, and then they feel insecure, and it makes the test less realistic. Even if you're super nice about it, it just changes the dynamic. So yeah, I'd rather do something like, well, I don't remember exactly, or I'm not sure, or I would love to hear what you think might happen if we click here. Because in real life, you wouldn't be there to guide them. So make sure you're not helping the user in any way. So also, not being leading. This is kind of hard. So here are some suggestions for things not to say and things you can say instead. So first off, I made the design for the new website, and I'd love to hear what you think. 2 things. So first of all, it's all about me. So I'm going to be really sad if you don't like it. And the second one is that I would love to hear what you think. So I'm basically inviting you to just give me all your opinions, like, well, I don't like purple or things like that. So instead, I'd go with something like, so the team who's designed the site needs help figuring out if it's really working. I'm going to repeat this, but if you keep thinking it in the context that the user is there to help you, can often avoid saying things that would kind of mess up the test situation. Another one is, which is we often do because it feels so natural. Let's see, say we have a user test and it's going, like the tasks, everything is going really great, and you're like, you're really good at this. You're solving all the tasks. And then the next task comes up and they're not doing that well. So you don't like, oh, you're so stupid. You're talentless at this. No. And then people are like, no, well, don't just say nothing then. But the thing is, if you just complimented someone and then suddenly you're like, okay, well, let's do the next one then. People will pick up on it. So never give people feedback, positive or negative feedback on how they're doing in the test. Use a completely neutral language, independent on whether they're doing good or bad. Instead, you can just thank them. So again, they're there to help you. So thank you. We've looked at that one. Let's move on to the next task. That works. If you always say that, regardless of whether it's going good or bad, you don't get this feeling of, oh, I'm messing it up, or it's a competition. Sometimes, though, it becomes so clear that something didn't really go that well that it becomes socially awkward not to acknowledge that it was really horrible. I once did this thing for this Norwegian cruise ship thing that goes on the fjord, and their target group is pensioners. And I sat a whole day torturing 68-year-old ladies back in 2010. So they were like 78 today, so you can imagine how tech-savvy they were. And then the client was in the room, and they were like, oh, yeah, I'm really computers and it's hard, and I'm so stupid. I was like, no, it's not you, it's the website. It's horrible, but I can tell them because the client was listening in the other room. So what do you do when it's horrible and you need to acknowledge it? Don't tell them, well, there's a trick here. If you just click on the menu button, that's super easy. I know it's kind of weird, but that's how it works. Because again, you're creating this dynamic. You're the smart one and they're the stupid one, even if you're being friendly about it. So again, think about thanking. Wow, there's really big room for improvement there. That's a good thing we caught that. Thank you for helping us identify this. If you're always thinking about this helping thing, it's like they feel useful when we find things that aren't working instead of stupid. And that's also the truth. That's why they're there. It's useful for us because we're all so much more tech savvy and so accustomed to things that we need this outside perspective. And then watch the body language and stuff like that. So just don't, yeah. The thing that the user is there to help you. Third factor playing in, observing. So ironically, because I talked about thinking out loud, I don't really want you to listen that much. I want you to observe, which sounds a little bit of counterintuitive. This goes back to something that humans do called rationalization. This is a very fascinating YouTube, really long, 2 hours, crazy thing about brains. But I'm going to really simplify it and do this really tabloid, but should try to explain this research because it's a really aha moment about how our brains work. So at some point, somebody thought it was a good idea to try to treat epilepsy by cutting the connection between the right brain and the left brain. Yeah, so that's weird, but they did that. And then these people mostly can work pretty okay in like their daily life, but maybe you remember this thing about the information from this to this eye goes to this part of the brain, and to this eye goes to this part of the brain. And also how typically different parts of the brain are responsible for drawing or like creative things, and the other one for language and talking. So in what Getzenega does in these experiments, he's not the one that cut their brains. So let's just be clear here. But people that had this procedure, because the two parts of the brain don't know what each other knows, right? Because the connection is cut. So you could also split their field of vision, and then you could show something to the one eye, and then just this part of the brain would know, and the other way around. So what he does is, for instance, like he shows someone a banana, and it's like, yeah, so do you want to draw something? Like, yeah, I could draw something. And then they're drawing something in this kind of shape, and they're asking them, yeah, so what are you drawing? Well, it's, it's kind of, yeah, I guess, yeah, it's a banana. Like, yeah, so why did you draw a banana? Well, I'm kind of hungry. It's been a little while since I had breakfast. Bananas are like a great snack. So yeah, I thought about food. So bananas are like great snacks. So I drew a banana. I really like bananas. And they were like, wait, that's not what happened because we just showed you the banana. But the thing is, the eye that saw the banana, that's the part of the brain that draws. The one that's explaining what it's doing doesn't know that we just saw a banana. So people are able to come up with these completely logical-sounding, rational explanations of their own behavior, but it's not necessarily true. It's not because they're lying, it's just because they're trying to understand their own behavior. We all do this every single day. And it's very difficult to do experiments on it because, how can you control it? So these are basically the only people where you can, control for it. So the thing is, when you ask a user, why did you not do this? Or why did you do that? They're going to give you a reason that sounds completely reasonable, but it's not necessarily true. Might be some other reason. So you have to differentiate between what the person did and said during the task, what's your interpretation, or their interpretation of why they did what they did, and also what you would believe would be a good solution. So just take an example to make it clearer. Someone didn't click the buy button. There can be a bunch of different reasons for that. It should be placed elsewhere. Or it has the wrong color or shape. Maybe buy sounds too committing. Should it be put in carton or something like that? Or is it a test situation? So people thought they weren't supposed to buy because it's just a test. The thing is, if you have people thinking aloud while they do the testing, they're like, well, there's no buy button here, then you will know that they're not seeing it. Or if people's like, well, should I click it, or is this for, should I really click it, or are we just pretending? Then you will know. Or if they think aloud, they're like, what happens if I click buy? So have them think out loud while they're doing it, and don't try to have them explain what they did in hindsight. So that was the basics, but I didn't really tell you how to do it at any budget. This was just me telling you this is how you should do it. So let's cut the budgets here. So but the thing is, I want you to cut corners when it comes to user testing, but I want you to cut the right corners. Cut the expensive corners and not the one that's compromising the quality of your insights. Number one technique. So in this technique, I would show you the title and the intro of a page, And then I would ask you to read the title and the intro and write down 1 to 5 questions you expect will be answered on this page. Just try to think about it. Do you have examples of things that come to mind? Someone? Don't be shy. Okay, you are shy. That's okay. There's going to be drinks afterwards. Next task would be, I would tell you to then read the text and see whether your questions were answered. Is there content that could be cut or expanded? So one thing is to do this digitally like this, but even more easier is to just take the text that you want to test, you print it, and then you fold it. So people can see the title and the intro. And then they can write down their questions, like on the flap. And after they've written down their questions, then they get to open it and do the notes. The thing is, have you ever asked a colleague to like, hey, can you read over this text and see if it's any good? And you get the email back, it's like, yeah, there's a small typo in the second paragraph, but other than that, it looks nice, blinky smiley. And you're like, well, it's a good catch with that typo, but this feedback is not that useful. Because people are just like, yeah, this is a text, it's totally a text. It has words and sentences, and there's a bunch of them. Good job. The thing is with this tool is that you get feedback on needs instead of grammar and typos. It takes people into thinking like, well, what do I want to know? What am I curious about? So this one, you can, if you don't have the budget to do this, then you need to ask why you had the budget to go to this conference, but not do this. So we check that off. Even done it as a survey digitally. And the cool thing is, you don't even need to have the text. You could just have like the title and the intro, have people give you the questions, and you could use that as an outline when you start writing the text. So, that's cool. Okay, raise your hand if you've ever been in an argument about what gets to be in the menu. I don't believe, yeah, there's like, what? There's like 30% that never had to discuss the menu? Or what we should name the menu? That's interesting. Well, there's a great tool, actually, that solves that. So this is a specific tool, but I think there are other ways you can get around it without using this specific tool. So this is a tool called treejack. In treejack, you take all of the different menu points, and you just build it up kind of like a folder structure. And after you build up this folder structure, you give people tasks. So imagine that you're wondering whether there are any technical requirements to use Confrere. Where would you click? And then when people click on the different points, it expands, and you go deeper into the folder structure. And the great thing is that what we got on the other side is a really clear visualization of where people went. So it looks something like this. So the thicker the line, the more people went down there. If it's green, it went to the place where we hoped they would go. What we said was like the correct answer. And as you can see here, again, I thought I was an expert. I really suck at this. They're going here, I would hope, or they're going here, and I thought they were going to go here. So I need to fix that. So this is what it looks like when you have a little more of respondents and a little deeper information architecture. It's really easy to read. After I started using this tool when I was in the agency, I never had to discuss information architecture menus again. It just stopped. People were like, oh, it actually works. I never would have guessed, but great. And they stopped worrying about it because they could see the numbers and it's easy to read. This is what it looks like when you did a pretty good guess at first try. One time, this was the Norwegian Labour Party, and then I got to work and I was going to check results for the next survey, and it looked like this. So you can really tell if you've done a bad job. If it looks like someone was like, you know, just going all over the place, then you kind of need to do a reiteration. So that was free up to 10 people. It's probably useful to have like 35, 50. But so the first two things that I mentioned are basically about words. The reason I mention words first is just because words are so cheap to fix. It's just copy. But another tool, which is also one of these user research survey tools, is to do first click tests. So these are great to combine with meeting people face-to-face when you do user testing. If you're like curious, like, well, one person didn't figure it out, but do more people figure it out? We need something more representative. You can do this service. It's still, again, it's just a survey tool. So you're wondering how this video calling tool is different from e.g. Skype. Where would you click? So you give them tasks, and it's important to give tasks, again, that aren't too leading. And on the other side, you get heat maps of where people clicked. So here's 80 to 70% clicked here. Or you could also, they have a bunch of analysis things on the other side. But I'd rather have you meet more people and not just do survey tools. I want you to get out. This one has the price of snacks. It's very easy because you just need things you already have. I'm sure all of you have laptops or tablets or phones. This is a technique that works great when you're going to survey something, test something that's very specific. So I was working for the Norwegian Labour Party for a platform where people could submit suggestions for their political platform. It was supposed to be not censored at all. Anyone could add a suggestion. So we kind of wanted to take out the trolling but not censor it. I call myself a UX designer, but this is typically what I do. I did not make this one. I just made this one, but that's how I roll. So if anyone was supposed to be able to submit a suggestion, and the great thing about when anyone is your target group is that anyone is very easy to recruit. So we just, this is me and Morten from the Norwegian Labour Party. You can just see the silhouette, but I can promise you, we're both smiling and we're happy. So just imagine our happy smiling faces. And there's chocolate here. So the thing is, we went down to the central station in Oslo. When you hear central station, you might kind of imagine a place where people are just like, I don't have time for this, leave me alone. But the thing is central station, so every kind of central station is also a place where a lot of people are bored. So they're not that easy to see, but most of the people at central stations or at stations, any kind of station, are more like this. Like on their phones, waiting for someone or something, maybe waiting for you to sneak up on them with chocolates. So you're just like, and then we get like eye contact, or they get eye contact with the chocolate, you just give them the iPad instead. Okay, not exactly, that's a joke. I don't really mean that, but this is kind of part of it. You have to introduce yourself. So, hi, I'm Ida. I'm coming on behalf of the Norwegian Labour Party. Do you maybe have 2 minutes to spare to look at this website? And as thanks for your help, I have chocolate. It's important that you keep to your promise about 2 minutes. Don't steal their time. Also, the fruit is surprisingly important because some people were like, no, I don't want chocolate. I don't need chocolate. And then you get like, well, I have fruit. And then afterwards, they take the chocolate anyway because they reward themselves for having considered the chocolate. There's actually academic research on this that if you add a healthy option to the dessert menu, more people in total will buy dessert. So that resource link is also on that resources page. So bring the fruit. You're going to bring all the fruit back again, but it's going to help you in the recruiting. So a good thing, an important thing to note here with this technique, ethical research. GDPR has made more people think about this, but this has also always been an important principle. So if you test in this way, when you say, can I talk to you, would you like to check that out for 2 minutes, that has to be the whole story. It's not like you have some colleague around the corner taking pictures or like you're writing down their names. Like it has to be going out, using the thing, then going back and just thinking about usability issues. No storing any data about any person in any way. That's when you can skip the informed consent thing, because you're informing them in full in the conversation. The conversation is what it seems. There's nothing extra to it. And then also it has to be really short. This is the form that we tested, so you could actually realistically test this form in 2 minutes. If you need more time, that's when I feel myself, again, thinking, oh, I wish that I had that lab again, the lab testing that we did at the agency. But you can also do lab tests on a budget. Depending on who your target group is, of course, the first corner that you can cut corners. Is that what they say in English? Do you cut corners? Yeah, great. So the first corner to cut, recruitment. This is some lovely, someone mentioned Google Translate earlier about localization. So here's some great Google Translate for you. I shared the cinnamon buns again. I sound like a wizard. Or Yoda or something. In return, you must give me 10 to 20 minutes of your time to try out a prototype on Thursday. I can get you to where you are. Are you with? I feel like a wizard, like in the Google Translate version. I once had Google Translate from Norwegian. Google does a pretty good job, and then they translated it to Google does an okay job completely. I was like, yeah, that's pretty accurate. So, for some reason, so the thing is, people are, of course, not signing up on this in my Facebook stream because, oh my God, free cinnamon buns. And the essential thing is, of course, that I'm coming to where they are, and I'm promising that it's going to take maximum 20 minutes. If you want to cut down, make it easy to recruit people, go to where they are, and cut down the time of your user testing. Most people are just happy to get like a 20-minute break anyway. So that's the first thing. So when I did this, I got all these different people. This is how I typically user test now. I have a bike. This works in the Netherlands too, I think. So I figured out where all the different peoples were, and I mapped out a route. So I started at 9 in the morning. This is actually the east side of Oslo. I flipped the map a little bit. And then I biked through the Oslo and ended up on the west side. So in total for the CSS for a Norwegian newspaper, I spent 9.5 hours for recruiting, user testing, and documenting the user test. And my only cost was cinnamon buns. But they're really expensive in Norway, so, you know, that's like 100 euros or something in cinnamon buns. But that's another thing. And then just sit next to them. And actually, I would typically then use my own laptop. There's tools for this on Windows. Many of you maybe use a Mac. It's actually, QuickTime has a built-in screen recording tool where you can activate the internal microphone and show mouse clicks. And let me just show you what that looks like if you just use the screen recording to document the test.
I can see it's something Y compare. I'm trying to find out why I should use this service. I like this.
The thing is now, if you've just been
appeals
watching
to me a lot. Like if I would use it, it's I want it to be easy.
Yeah, I'm just gonna tone down the volume a little bit. But as you can see, it's not actually that hard. If you have people thinking out loud, and you have the screen recordings and the mouse clicks, it's quite easy to follow along, huh? Like you feel like you know what's going on here? Yeah. You don't need, and also if you don't use like a web camera or things like that.
I think this, that's...
I'm just going to mute him now. People just get stressed out if you need a web camera anyway. So if you can in the informed consent, because here we need informed consents, and this guy has consented to being on this stage also. Then you don't, you can just say on the informed consent that we're just screen recording on your voice, and most people are a lot more comfortable with that. But how if you're going to test on mobile? So if you're going to test on mobile, often people think, well, now we have built-in screen recording on mobile too. But my favorite is this one. Hugging. You see what's going on here? You already have your mobile user testing lab right here, and the quality is surprisingly good. Look at this.
What does this mean? Desk. This is
this
perfect
laptop
for consultants, for tutors. $9 a month per active team member. And this is Office, and that's perfect for physicians.
Yeah.
That seems relevant.
Yeah, I'm going to mute him again. And the thing is also, even so now I'm doing screen recording, but again, you all could be my colleagues that wanted to observe it, and I could just screen share it. And I could be out in the field testing with people, and you could sit back at the office. We just need a screen sharing tool to do that. I can call in, share the screen, and you could follow along and take notes. It's kind of like with football. Nobody watches the football game, like really, in recording. Like the second anything boring happens, you just want to fast forward. You have the same problem with user testing. Either people need to hear the summary, or they need to be there to see it live. Yeah. So these are my techniques. When it comes to prioritizing, I love spreadsheets, or spreadsheets on steroids, as they call themselves. But I think it's important that you do it together with your team and you involve them also. These are the 2 engineers in my team. So I mentioned 5 techniques here. The 3 of them are more to complement your techniques. I really hope that this has inspired you to see that you actually have the time and resources to go out. I'm going to mention, I forgot to mention that, in the Get Out thing, we tested with 12 people in 2 hours, and we just had to give away some chocolate. So that was like from we decided that we wanted to test until we came back and did the test, that was 2 hours, 12 people. So you do have the time and resources to do it, but I really hope that you will try to meet people face to face too, because you just learn so much more. Thank you. Yeah, I'm going to say that.
So I work a lot with students,
Yep.
and I've tried to promote user testing, and they're always low on budget
Yep.
and always low on time.
Yeah,
And for some reason, all the users they test are always 20-year-old students.
yeah.
So what would you advise to make it easier?
Yeah, so actually for the thing where I did with the online newspaper, I started asking my friends if I could test with their parents. And for that newspaper, there was a lot of people that cared about the newspaper, so that it was easy. So that's one thing you can do. Can you just ask a friend of a friend? And you just need, again, you just need 3 or 4. So it's not that much work to ask a friend of a friend. And also, I would think about, well, where are my users actually? Is there a physical place where I could go and I could ask people? So I mentioned the Norwegian Post a couple of times. When they were testing their new map solution, they just went down to a post office in December when everyone was waiting in line. Anyway, and they had gingerbread and just asked people there, because there you will find a broader range of people. So it's just thinking about where are they already and just go there, because it makes it so much easier for people to say yes.
Yeah. And if I get it right, nowadays you're forced to do on a budget. So I was just wondering, after all these great insights, would you spend higher budgets when your company grows, or would you keep going on like this? And on what would you spend more budget?
I think the thing that's I would spend more resources on would be recruiting, because the exact thing that you're mentioning. So that's the thing that's, at least if you want to have representative and people that are further out of your network, to have a recruiting agency, or maybe have people come to a place where you don't. That's the only thing. I wouldn't buy more equipment or things like that. Just recruiting is the one thing that's, you kind of have to spend more hours, do really well when you're doing it yourself.
Yeah, right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.